The Paddy Power Half Hour on Off the Ball.
With Paddy Power, the greatest football partnership since Jeff and Heskey.
You're very welcome along to today's edition of the Paddy Power Half Hour. We hope this Good Friday is finding you well. We will be looking back at some of the historic Good Friday fixtures and some very memorable ones over the next half hour. And we're also going to talk about the change in management in the Republic of Ireland football team. Stephen Kenny is in and Mick McCarthy is out ahead of the trip to Bratislava this autumn. Joining us to look at all of these issues today is Enda Coll and also Phil Egan. Good afternoon to you, gentlemen.
Hey, Will.
We'll kick off with Stephen Kenny and Mick McCarthy because sometimes in this show we get things wrong. And last week we got it dramatically wrong. I think all three of us thought there was a very good chance that Mick McCarthy would still be around for that qualifier and potentially for the Euros in 2021 as well. And that's not what happened. Everything changed at around 4 o'clock on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, well, it's sort of like when you're talking about anything these days, it could be out of date within 30 minutes to an hour, and that turned out to be the case with Stephen Kenny. I think all of us on this show especially thought that Mick McCarthy might have put up a bigger fight in terms of negotiations, in terms of wanting to finish out his term as Irish manager. That didn't happen. And to be honest, I think it's probably the right thing for Mick to do. It's a very decent thing for him to do. And we can't really make any bones about it. He's getting a nice payout as well. So it's not as if he's just stepping away for no good reason. He's getting paid for what he did. He got paid a handsome sum for the 10 games that he was in charge. But at the end of the day, it is a good thing for him to do. It saves the FAI money and it saves everyone a bit of time as well. It gives Stephen Kenny a great chance to get a couple of games under his belt before the Slovakia game as well. So overall, it was a very good week for Irish football.
Phil, what was your take on the decision by the FAI then?
Yeah, I obviously was surprised given the nature of the conversation we had this day last week. And I suppose the confusion was probably over the fine print in the contract. Mick McCarthy, we knew, was out of contract on the 31st of July. But was it at the end of the European Championships? Was it at the end of a campaign? It seems it was actually quite straightforward that he was going to be out of his job by the 31st of July. So once that game against Slovakia got pushed back from June to whenever it takes place, whether it's November of this year or even into, there has been speculation it could be March of next year. But once it went beyond the 31st of July, then it actually made things quite straightforward for the FAI, and Stephen Kenny comes in, and yeah, it's just another little layer in the deal that was put in place by the former FAI CEO when Mick McCarthy was brought in and Stephen Kenny was the succession plan. That we knew it was a little bit messy as it was, and this was just another little bit of a mess that had to be cleared up. And thankfully it was cleared up actually pretty cleanly, pretty quickly, and now we can all look forward to Stephen Kenny taking over. And as Enda said, if he can get a couple of games before that Slovakia game, it would be ideal, because it'd be nice to see a few players given a chance and also a chance for Stephen Kenny to implement what is going to be a change of style.
The only thing is, Phil, we're in this kind of great unknown period at the moment. We're not sure when seasons could resume. We're not sure when international football will come back. We know it definitely won't be before the end of June. I suppose he'd be very hopeful, Stephen Kenny, that one or two exhibition games can take place beforehand, but there's no guarantee that his first game in charge mightn't be the Slovakia game.
Yeah, which obviously wouldn't be ideal, and some people will say, well, there's no pressure on him because it's not his campaign, but there's a place at the Euros at stake, and if we're to believe what we've read in the last couple of days, there is a chance that there could be more games in Dublin, because some nations that are involved in this multi-nation tournament are not too keen on hosting, given what's going on with the coronavirus. But ultimately the FAI want games that are going to be played in Dublin next summer to include the Republic of Ireland. So of course there's going to be pressure on Stephen Kenny. How many days training would he need to get his message across, and what could he change if it was just a one-off game? So ideally he gets a few games beforehand, and then he can start to bring in a few of the younger players. But also something that people don't really talk about that much since he's taken over is that the current crop that are in there, he has the ability to improve a lot of these players as well.
And that was an interesting point, which was raised by David Myler on Off the Ball earlier this week as well. You know, potentially you come into a camp, maybe 2 camps ahead of this qualifier. Realistically, by the time the guys arrive and they've got their first night in the hotel, you've got maybe 2 to 3 days on the training pitch with them. That is one of the difficulties if Stephen Kenny is going to fundamentally change the style of this team, is that he's going to have very little time face-to-face with the players ahead of this game in Slovakia.
Yeah, well, it's a point that was brought up by a couple of ex-Irish internationals as well that we had across Off the Ball the last week or so. The likes of Gary Breen said the first training session is the very first time that Kenny's going to meet them, and that's going to be the vital training session that he's going to take in his Irish campaign, because that's where the players instantly realise whether this guy is a bluffer or whether this guy knows what he's talking about. So that's going to be vitally important. I think the way that Gary Owens is chatting, the interim CEO of the FAI, he's hopeful that they might have even up to 10 games before the Slovakia game to get Stephen Kenny time to filter into this team. But he's talking about a sort of an autumn series, which at this point in time seems optimistic. But I mean, it's not crazy to think that could happen come November, October time. So if that is the case, if he gets that chance to set up his team in international friendlies, then that's a perfect opportunity, Stephen Kenny, to work with these players and get them to play to his brand of football. But I think the key point that everyone's talking about this week is Stephen Kenny's style of management, his tactical nous, and whether he can transform that and bring it into an international setup where he doesn't have a lot of time to work with these players. But if you speak to anybody who worked under Stephen Kenny, his man management is also a massive thing. And I think Richie Towell was on OTB AM on Monday talking about it, and how coming out of the dressing room, going into a game, they knew, first of all, knew exactly what they needed to do out in the pitch, where they wanted to be, tactically what they were doing, but also they felt like $1 million. They felt as if they could take on the world. And you see that in the way that Dundalk played in the Champions League against the likes of Zenit, against the likes of AZ Alkmaar. So whatever about his tactical nous, I think that will come with time, regardless if he's given the time to do that. But I think instantly he's going to go into that dressing room, demand respect from these players, and also tell them that the exact opposite of what they've been told for the last 5, 6, 7 years. They can't play football, because this team, they're not getting the best out of this team. There are players in there that can play football, and I would say they want to play football. So if Stephen Kenny comes in and releases them and lets them do that, then I think there is potential within this Ireland setup to maybe not push for like a quarter final in the World Cup, but at least get out of the group stages in the Euros.
Phil, we've seen a bit of Stephen Kenny tactically as an international manager already. You know, over the last couple of years with the under-21s, they played with an expressive style of football. They try and press up high as well, and they try and play their way out when other teams try and counter-press them as well. Is that what we expect at senior level from Stephen Kenny, that he'll bring that very similar style of football up to the senior team?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the way his teams play. And one thing we struggled with at senior level for the last few years is patterns of play and attack, because we're set up fairly solid defensively. We don't concede that many goals, but we don't create enough chances. And when we get the ball in midfield, we don't look like creating chances. We don't look like we've got ideas. So one thing Stephen Kenny's very good at is knowing how to set up a team that can actually attack. And if players have to be patient, if you go into space looking for something, if it's not on, you come back out, you rebuild. But the key there is you've got possession of the football. And, if the Slovakia game comes earlier than we think it might in terms of games to prepare for, there is always the option of playing games behind closed doors. And I know the senior team of the under-21s played a game behind closed doors when Stephen Kenny was the 21s manager, and the 21s actually won that day. And the signs have been good with this under-21s team for the last under Stephen Kenny, and you'd imagine he's going to promote some of those players. But something Enda touched on as well is I'm looking forward to a manager who's not going to publicly tell us how we don't have good footballers, because to play in the Premier League, to play in the Championship, to play in the League of Ireland, you've got to be a good footballer. So we have good footballers. And now Stephen Kenny is going to knit that all together and hopefully get the best out of them. And in fairness to Mick McCarthy, it was always a short-term fix. So he was pretty much sticking with the same 11. And, part of me can understand that. And he used to get asked about bringing in young players, but he was there just to qualify for the Euros. It was purely short term. Might have been selfish on his behalf, but that was the way he was thinking. Whereas Stephen Kenny obviously knew he was getting this job. So while he's been managing the 21s, he's been looking at players. He knows about their personalities, their character, their traits, whether they'll actually be able to develop into senior international players. And I'm sure as well, he's been looking at the current crop, looking at them and thinking, yeah, if I had this player on my team, this is what I could do with them, because, he has to get the best out of those players as well.
And who among those under-21s do you reckon is ready for the step up?
It's been a question that's been raised sort of all throughout the week. I think the obvious answer is Jason Malumbi. He's playing at a high level in the championship with Millwall. He's been fantastic this season. He's exactly the type of midfielder that we're needing, because I know Glenn Whelan kind of came in, but he's not exactly the youngest player in the team. So we need a younger player to come through in the centre midfield. Adam Ida is another name that's been pegged as someone who'll be a potential senior international because of the style of play that Stephen Kenny likes to play. He does like a dynamic, strong forward who's also able to hold up the ball and run the channels as well. So he seems to fit the bill. I think it's unfortunate for Darragh O'Shea at left back that Enda Stevens is playing so well for Sheffield United, because I think in other circumstances he would be pushing for a spot in the senior team. I would say we can see him probably coming up onto the bench at least, maybe getting a few caps. Jack Byrne he's not an under 21, but I would say he'll be in the team more often than he's not for Ireland. And I would say at the minute that's probably it. Troy Parrott's not playing enough football to warrant getting into the senior team. Michael Obafemi potentially might come in as well on the bench, but I can't see him being an automatic starter under Stephen Kenny. But one thing I do want to touch on, just building on what Phil was saying about the under-21s and the brand of football they were playing, I think one thing that we're looking forward to here is an Ireland team that won't be dominated by the weaker teams. They'll bring the game to those teams. And two of the worst games that I've ever been to as an Irish fan, first of all, were Georgia at home, when Georgia had 65% possession at one point in the game, had more shots on target than Ireland. And granted, Ireland came out to a 1-0 win that night, but it was atrocious to watch. We were playing as if we were the team ranked out of the top 100 in the world, when really we were the team that should have been going out and bossing that game. And that's not going to happen under Stephen Kenny. I can't see a world where that's going to happen under Stephen Kenny.
Phil, I guess a balance has to be struck here as well. I mean, obviously he's working with a squad that have got Ireland to this point and into a playoff and potentially 2 games away from qualifying for the Euros, while also trying to bring players through. Do you think he'll probably wait until after the qualifier and maybe after the European campaign to bring people in, or should we expect a new wave of players coming in time for Bratislava?
Well, I think it does depend on when that game comes around and what preparation he has in terms of games. If there's friendly games, if there's Nations League games before that, then obviously he can try out players. But it's not as if the current Ireland starting 11 has a load of problems in it. You have a good goalkeeper, you've got a headache at right back. Do you play Seamus Coleman or Matt Doherty? Then you've got Enda Stevens, who's in great form. You've got Shane Duffy and John Egan are probably going to be your centre halves. So that back five is, that's a decent back five. What he does at right back will be interesting, because obviously Seamus Coleman was Mick McCarthy's captain. We know how inspirational he is as a captain. Is there scope there for Stephen Kenny maybe to tinker with his formation? He might decide maybe I could play 3 at the back and play Matt Doherty as a wing back and Seamus Coleman as the one of the 3 centre halves. Midfield is the worry, and was the area that we really struggled, because I actually thought David McGoldrick, obviously not prolific and hasn't been with his club this season, but really put in a good shift. He's good at holding up the ball, he can create, but that midfield 3 wasn't creating enough. Glenn Whelan was obviously in there to break things up, and I actually thought he was our best midfielder of the 3, but Enda mentioned Malumbi. So if you bring Malumbi in, then you've got a player who wants to get on the ball and wants to make things happen. Josh Cullen has kind of come back in. Obviously, before play was suspended, he was working his way back with Charlton, because he started the season pretty well, picked up an injury. So he's another option in there. if you can get the midfield unit being a bit more creative, then we start creating more chances. And Jeff Hendrick obviously is a player that has been criticised heavily because he's never really recreated that form that he had at Euro 2016 when he was one of Ireland's best players. But I guarantee if you've got a more dynamic team and you've got a team that creates more space, Jeff Hendrick's going to thrive in that.
And who do you think is in danger possibly of losing their place in the team then?
It's hard to tell at this point in time. I suppose James McLean would be the first player that springs to mind. I suppose Stephen Kenny does like working players who work hard as well, but he wants people who are going to hold the ball up and they're going to work under pressure properly with and retain possession. James McLean has proven that he doesn't do that over the last couple of games. That might change under Stephen Kenny. He might be able to work with him and improve him. I know he played under him at Derry City for a while as well. So I don't know what their relationship is like. He'd be the first player that springs to mind. I suppose David McGoldrick, he has been brilliant for Ireland, but again, he's not getting any younger, and we don't know how long he's going to play for Ireland over the next couple of years. And probably Glenn Whelan is another one. Martin O'Neill essentially retired him. I would say Glenn Whelan's probably going to retire himself fairly soon. He's playing a little bit of football for Fleetwood Town, but apart from that, I don't think Fleetwood Town is a strong enough quality of team in a strong enough league to warrant an automatic start for the Irish international team. If we're going on the basis that people are being picked for the standard of play that they're playing at, as has been the case over the last couple of years for Ireland, then playing for Fleetwood Town doesn't warrant a starting place in the Ireland team for me.
Okay, let's have a look then at some famous Good Friday fixtures that have taken place in years gone by. We can't quite go back to 1915, which was the first one that I picked up on, which was the betting scandal between Liverpool and Manchester United. 7 players in the end were banned across both teams. Manchester United needed a win to stay up in the Old English First Division. Liverpool were sitting comfortably in mid-table, and an agreement was made for Manchester United to win. Liverpool allegedly, and I guess it was eventually landed in suspensions, which were later appealed, missed a penalty in the game and let in what was reported as 2 very soft goals to let Manchester United win by 2-0. Then we jump forward perhaps to our more contemporary times, gentlemen. We'll start with 1998, Phil. Liverpool against Manchester United again. In this case, I guess one of the most memorable early games of Michael Owen. He scored at Old Trafford in a 1-1 draw and got himself sent off less than 5 minutes later.
Yeah, this was just a few months before the 98 World Cup, where if people didn't know who Michael Owen was, they certainly did after that tournament. But yeah, he was just all over the place. He's just buzzing around the place. Obviously, he scored the goal. Ronnie Johnson gave United the lead, but Michael Owen goes in late on Peter Schmeichel. Mm-hmm. He gets his goal, which again shows his blistering pace, where Gary Pallister hesitates, thinking Schmeichel's going to come out, and by the time Pallister's reacted, Owen's gone by him, balls in the back of the net. But then a few minutes later, Ronnie Johnson gets a ball from Schmeichel, takes a touch, a little bit in front of him, gives Michael Owen enough of a look at the ball to think, I'm going to go and try and win that. And he goes in late on Ronnie Johnson. Actually could have been a straight red, but it was Graham Poe was the referee that day, gave him a second yellow, so he was sent off. But that game, that was a Good Friday. I remember it was a 5 o'clock kickoff at Old Trafford. United, it was a real blow for United's title chances, because after that they were only 7 ahead of Arsenal, but Arsenal had 4 games in hand, and Arsenal would ultimately go on and win the league that season. It was when Tony Adams scored in that 4-0 win over Everton on the final day of the season to wrap up the league. So it was a real, and another little bit of spice to the game was Paul Ince captained Liverpool. It was his first game back at Old Trafford since he had moved to Liverpool, and he had actually talked in the lead up to the game how he was pushed out. He was pushed out by Alex Ferguson. He nearly scored in the game as well. But yeah, you don't really get many Premier League games on a Good Friday. It's really associated with Championship, where you get a rake of Championship games on a Good Friday. But that was one that I remember. There was another one as well that sprung to mind as well. I'm sure we'll come to that in a bit. Yeah,
I suppose probably more closely associate Rugby League with Wigan and St Helens probably on a Good Friday. And then, as you mentioned, a lot of kind of second flight football in England generally on that day over the years as well. Enda, though, in terms of Michael Owen, that was very much an announcement game for him. He's breaking into the England team at the time as well. And then he leads the line at the World Cup later that year. Just 3 months later, he scores one of probably the most epic goals in World Cup history against Argentina.
Yeah, it was when Phil mentioned we should talk about this game, the game that he scored at Old Trafford. The first thing that came into my head was Michael Owen's goal against Argentina in the 1998 World Cup, the one that David Beckham gets sent off in. And I went back and watched the game. And honestly, it's some of the defending in that game was atrocious. Batistua opens the scoring for Argentina. Unbelievable player, first of all. Then Michael Owen wins a penalty. It definitely was not a penalty. 100%. He gets in behind the defence, and the Argentina defender, I didn't catch who it was, sort of puts his hands up, trying not to touch him, and Michael Owen just goes down, gets a penalty. Shearer scores a penalty. But then, obviously, he scores that wonderful goal. David Beckham got sent off in that game, and he was destroyed by the English media afterwards, like absolutely tormented. And there's pictures of like people burning effigies of David Beckham in the street after this. And Michael Owen even said that he never really forgave David Beckham for getting sent off in that game, but he set up Michael Owen's goal with a brilliant pass. So I don't know what Michael Owen was talking about there. But even just if you go in, we're looking on that game, some of the stuff that went on, you wouldn't see it now. It was an absolute joke. Argentina's second goal can only be blamed on the defence because it was a free kick. And
Clever free kick, though.
Zanetti just stands behind the wall, unmarked. Nobody looks at him because they all think Batistua is going to blast this ball. And then instead it's Juan Sebastian Veron plays a lovely little pass into the box, and Zanetti hits it first time into the net. And then when it goes to penalties, and we're talking about David Beckham getting sent off, and people blame him for this game. David Batty hit the last penalty for England in that game. He hadn't scored for England ever. In 34 games, he had never scored for England, and he was hitting the decisive penalty at the World Cup. What were they thinking?
Is Kevin Keegan not to blame here, Enda? If I remember the commentary in this one, it was like, is he going to score? And Keegan's like, yeah, and then he misses.
Yeah. Yeah, it's laughable. But they also took Paul Scholes off before extra time and took Paul Merson on for him. So Merson obviously would have been a brilliant striker in his day. So why wasn't he hitting the penalty? Why did they put David Batty on it?
Well, Batty could have been the only one putting his hand up. Some players just don't want to take penalties.
Yeah,
so
and also on this, we mentioned Paul Ince at Old Trafford for Liverpool that day. He missed one of the penalties as well, and it was a shocking penalty.
Phil, David Beckham, very silly in that game, is my main memory. Diego Simeone was trying to wind him up for quite some time. Simeone is still winding people up 20 years later. Interesting, though, looking back at a game that probably, I think on reflection, last time I watched this was a couple of years ago, England should have probably won this one.
Yeah, then Sol Campbell had a goal disallowed as well. Yeah. But but that was, getting back to Michael Owen, that was when Michael Owen was just explosive. Before he picked up that hamstring injury, when he used to just glide by players. His first touch, the ball from Beckham is good. And then Owen's first touch gets it out and he just goes by players like they weren't there. And the finish as well. Even his penalty in the shootout, he puts it in off the post. Just fearless. When Michael Owen burst onto the scene, he was unbelievable. And that performance, even at Old Trafford, okay, he gets sent off, but he was just a little pocket rocket going around and said, leave. I don't know why. I never really associated him with being a filthy player, but he just, as I said, he left one in late on Schmeichel. He obviously took Ronnie Johnson out of it as well. In terms of the penalty that he won in that 98 game, he also won a fairly cheap penalty in the 2002 World Cup game against Argentina as well, which Beckham scored the penalty from. So that was the whole redemption story. I know we're kind of moving away from Good Friday and all that, but Michael Owen didn't, like he's talked about it before, like if there was a chance to go down, like you do what you do to win the penalty. And in fairness, after what Diego Simeone did, you wouldn't really feel too sorry for Argentina.
No,
I actually don't think it was a red card at all on second look. Just looking back on the general game, the standard refereeing was poor throughout. Like I said, that penalty for Michael Owen wasn't really a penalty. Sol Campbell's goal should have been allowed. It wasn't a foul on the keeper. And I think it was a yellow card for David Beckham. It wasn't a red card.
I don't know. He flicks the leg out end. I think that's a red.
It was a little flick.
There we go. 22 years later, Enda Coll is now still arguing about that red card. We'll stick with international football, Phil, for the next Good Friday memory as well. This one not from too long ago, 4 years ago this year. Ireland were getting ready to go to a European Championships in 2016, and they played Switzerland at the Aviva, and Ireland got a very rare win against Switzerland as well.
Yeah, but this game will always be remembered, Will, for one reason, and one reason only. The bar was open at the Aviva. I never saw so many people at the Aviva a couple hours before kick-off. And I remember I went to the toilet. I was in the press box. I went down to the toilet, say, maybe 10 minutes before the game. And the concourse were still packed. People just supping those pints in before they went to their seats. And even after the game, usually by the time we leave and we do the post-match press conferences, like the Aviva is pretty much deserted. It was still packed because people knew if we leave, that's the end of our drinking. But the game itself, yeah, I remember Kieran Clark scored early. Also, another thing that springs to mind, Kevin Doyle got a bad injury in that game. He was taken off early enough. Johnny Hayes made his debut in that game as well. But yeah, that's, things were looking good. We played Slovakia a few days later as well, and we were all looking forward to the Euros. Remember, we played the Dutch as well, not long before. It was probably the game in Turner's Cross as well, where we played against Belarus, where a few players had some shocking games. But obviously, the Euros would have been deemed a fairly successful tournament. But the Good Friday game, kind of two things actually I forgot to mention as well. It was marking the 1916 Easter Rising as well. I think I remember the programme. There was a special programme made for that one as well.
Just to give the viewers and listeners a bit of context as well, who might not be aware with the way the press area is set up in the Aviva Stadium, you actually have to go through a bar effectively to go to the toilet, and you have to again go through pretty much 3 sections of bars in order to get to the area where we go down to interview the managers and players afterwards as well. And depending on the fixture, it can be tricky enough to make your way through those bars on the way down. And we're going to take a look back at 2004 then, in terms of Arsenal's unbeaten season, their invincibles. They got out a little bit against Liverpool. They beat them 4-2 in the end. It was just 2 weeks before they lifted the title at Spurs ground at White Hart Lane as well. But Arsene Wenger said, and I'm not going to misquote him, I'm just going to quote what Wenger said about this game, the 4-2 win against Liverpool. He was asked what was his favourite memory as Arsenal manager. He said, it was the year we won the championship in 2004. We were 2-1 down at half-time and won 4-2. Thierry got a hat-trick. It was a pivotal game in our unbeaten season, and it was always an important game against Liverpool. So we had an Henry magic show at Highbury as Arsenal got a 4-2 win, Enda.
Yeah, it was a sensational game, and for some reason over the last week or so, I've just found myself watching a lot of vintage Arsenal games of around the 2000 era, the early 2000s. The one thing that I notice is how brilliant Highbury looks on the TV. It's the camera angle was perfect. The crowd is so close to the pitch, and it looked brilliant on a sunny day. It looked absolutely perfect. In that game, again, standard refereeing, not all that great. Gilberto Silva fouled Didi Hamann in the build-up to Henry's first goal. And there's a couple other incidents in it as well that you probably wouldn't get away with in today's modern game, but Henry was phenomenal at that game. The second goal he scored is up there with one of the best goals ever scored in the Premier League, if you take in the context of it, how important it was. And he was just a phenomenal player. But another player that scored in that game was Robert Pires, and he was actually my favourite Arsenal player at that point in time. I don't know why. He had all the skill and class of a Bergkamp, but he had a little bit of bite about him as well. He didn't get pushed around.
My memory of the game, Phil, was I remember Thierry Henry going through and Jamie Carragher just kind of trailing after him, and once he got one-on-one with Dudek, there was no way he was going to miss. There was something about Henry at that time as well. He used to give Carragher nightmares all the time, didn't he?
Yeah, and it's funny, Carragher actually, I saw him recently enough on Gary Neville's Soccer Box talking about how he didn't mind players that he could get tight to. Obviously, and not necessarily physical players, but with Henry, he would obviously pull out wide, so it was hard to get tight to. So if Henry's running at you, and with that goal in particular, he dummied and Carragher turned away thinking he was going to block, but he gave plenty of defenders a lot of problems. And that game as well, the context of that game is a few days beforehand, Chelsea have gone to Highbury and Wayne Bridges scored that goal to knock them out of the Champions League. A few days before that, Manchester United had beaten Arsenal in the FA Cup. So Arsenal had ambitions of a treble themselves. And given how good that team was, they obviously win the league. They go unbeaten for the league season. But that game was, I can understand why Wenger would have thought it was a satisfying win, because obviously, you're losing 2-1 at half time to Liverpool, and then they come up with that second half performance. They go on and win the league, but it was off the back of those two disappointing defeats. Even worth mentioning, Michael Owen actually scored in that game as well. The ball from Gerrard is unbelievable. Just plays it down the side of Sol Campbell, and Owen just runs on first touch into the back of the net. But Henry, his first goal as well, one touch, second touch, bang, back of the net. And he was. There's a reason he's always mentioned in the conversation for the greatest Premier League players of all time. So, and agree with you, Highbury was just a brilliant stadium.
Yeah, it's class. One thing as well on that is just each of the three goals there was some bit of individual class in all of them. The third goal, the pass from Bergkamp over the top of the defence was to a T on Henry's toe. It was absolutely phenomenal. What a team, though.
Yeah. Well, some serious finishes in that game as well. In terms of the Good Friday fixtures, Phil, it's something I think, look, we'll talk about this more in 2021 when football comes back, the Easter schedule. I remember kind of when I was younger, they used to play quite a few games across Easter Monday, and sometimes you say championship games would be on the Friday as well. I think now that the Premier League have a contract where they show games on Friday, there's huge potential to actually show some games on Good Friday to set up that weekend.
Yeah, well, it's business as usual if you go to the UK on a Good Friday. If I've been over there before, I can remember actually going to St James's Park. It was the Saturday of the Easter weekend, but you were going around Newcastle on the Friday, and it was just like any other day. Obviously, we're going down a similar route because pubs are open, but still offices are closed. Not all offices, but football fans these days will watch football any day. And I mean, there's an appetite there for it. So it is something that could come back. But maybe there is something that the crossover between the Premier League and the EFL. It is historically now over the last few seasons. It is a day that kind of belongs to the Championship. Mm.
Well, gentlemen, thanks a million for joining me this afternoon on the Paddy Power Half Hour. Thanks to you for joining us and listening or viewing the show today. If you missed any of it, you can watch us back on Off the Ball social channels on YouTube, on Facebook and on Twitter. And you can also check out the podcast on the highlights section on the Off the Ball website as well. We'll talk to you soon.
The Paddy Power Half Hour on Off the Ball.
With Paddy Power, the greatest football partnership since Jeff and Heskey.